What was the years you grew up in?
I was born in 1936, and I grew up through grade school and high school, and I graduated from high school in 1954.
There you go.
What time did you feel you were most matured? How old were you?
That's a tough question. I felt like I was matured when I was 6, but I wasn't.
How about when you were in Korea?
I felt like I was matured when I graduated from high school.
Did you?
Yeah.
Was there a lot of different races in your school growing up?
No.
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 What was it like?
What was it like?
Mm-hmm.
Grade school or high school? You got to be specific.
What was it like during like school, just like between growing up in the schools? Did it change a lot at one point?
Well, there was change, but
it really didn't change much in our
it
childhood.
didn't change too much in our period of time. The Second World War was on when just before when I went into first grade. That's when it started, or just before. And then I went through. I was fortunate in this sense. I was fortunate because I went to the same school district from grade school, junior high, and high school. It was the same.
The war did make it some changes. The war, I said not much, but when the war broke out, that we had a different kind of focus on helping the soldiers and that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, the war was big. When I first heard about the war, when Pearl Harbor hit, my mother and father took me downtown. And they didn't know about it. We were going downtown Eugene for breakfast. And newspaper boys at that time, they were out on the street, extra, extra, read all about it. I remember specifically the red lights were flashing. And I'd never seen them just flashing like that all over the town. And then the paper boy was saying Pearl Harbor was bombed. And President Roosevelt declares war on Japan. And I didn't even know what war meant.
December 7th, 1941. You probably already know that.
Where was your school and what was its name?
My school was in Eugene, Oregon, and the name was Bethel Grade School.
And Willamette High School.
And Willamette High School. Those are the two schools I went to.
Who were you expected to hang out with, if anybody at all? Like, races.
I don't know that I was expected to hang out with anybody.
There were no blacks at all. Zero in our high school or in our grade school.
Where were you during World War II?
I was in Eugene, going to Bethel Grade School, and we'd have bomb alerts because of the Japanese were coming into along the Pacific coast. They actually came into our Oregon and bombed some areas in Oregon.
What did the people have in their windows?
They always had a little flag with a star in the middle of it.
It was a big flag.
Well, it was about this big.
Yeah. If they had somebody serving in the military.
It showed that their son was there, and then if the star was there and it had another color on it, it showed that he had been killed in action during the war.
Did you know anybody that was in Japanese internment camps?
Or Japanese and German
internment.
Camps?
Internment camps.
Internment camps? Not personally, no. I did not. I know that when I went up to Fort Lewis to stay with my dad and mom during the war, he was in charge of German prisoners that were there, which surprised me because Germany's on the other side of the ocean, and they, instead of having Japanese prisoners, they had German prisoners that were working in the bakery where my dad was working.
What was it like during World War II?
Life like?
Yeah, like around the town and stuff.
Well, it was We played. Kids played. We played hide and seek and Annie over and Red Rover would come over. So there were a lot of games going on. We played war games. We used clods as hand grenades. So that was part of it. And there were things that were happening that people were talking about. My grandmother Slick, she would make us clean up our plates. And she'd say, and this was, and you got to remember this was during the war times.
And she was how old?
She was in her 60s at that time. She'd say, clean up your plate and it'll kill another Jap.
And what year was that, Lowell?
That was in 1942, 43. Yeah, they were hated because they bombed Pearl Harbor. They just sunk some ships, and they brought the war to us, and we finally ended it.
What was it like after the war? Like, how was society then?
Well, immediately after, everybody was really excited. I remember when the Japanese surrendered, and I was in Olympia, Washington at that time in the summertime, and everybody was cheering, and there were confetti and balloons going up because the war was over with the Japanese.
What did you go on to do after high school?
I went on to college to start with, and I wasn't sure what I really wanted to do in life at that point. I was the first person in our family to go to college. No one else had ever gone to college in my family. And so I was not, and my mother wanted me to go, but I wasn't really pushed or made to go. So I went to, after high school, I went to college for 3 terms.
Where'd you go?
Then I left because I decided to go into the service. At that time, you were drafted. When you were 18, you could be drafted into the military.
And you had to be signed up all the time.
And so I decided I wanted to get the military out of the way. I didn't want to get into a job or get married and then be drafted and be taken away from my family or work that I had.
The terminology was volunteer the draft.
Yeah, so I volunteered the draft because I didn't want to wait to be drafted because you didn't have any idea when you would be called. More than likely you would be, but there's also a possibility you wouldn't be. When I first went into the military, I was thinking about being a paratrooper. And then I got a letter from my grandmother one day that my real good friend of mine I went to high school with was a paratrooper, and he had made a jump and he broke his back and both legs. And I decided I didn't want to be a paratrooper. So I went back to the East Coast for training to become a map compiler, which we drew maps from aerial photographs. Yeah. And so I went back to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and I trained to become a map compiler. Well, then there was only 6 places in the world that I could go to be a map compiler, and one of them was Japan, and 2 in the United States, 1 in Panama, and then 1 in Germany. And so after those 6. I thought, well, I got my orders to go to the Far East, so I knew I was going to Japan. I just knew it. I knew Japan. That's where I'm going. And I came back out here to Fort Lewis and boarded a ship, and it said Incheon on my orders, and I'm thinking Incheon is Korea. They just. So I thought, well, I'm just going to Korea, and then they'll fly me over to Japan. I got to Korea, and they put me on a truck and drove me to a place called 8218 Aerial Photograph. And I got off, and I thought, well, they're going to finally take me to Japan from here. And I stayed there for 18 months. Then I came back home.
What did you teach?
What did I teach?
Yes.
Principally I taught drama and speech, but then I had some other things I taught.
How long did you teach for?
I taught for 42 years.
Did your generation have to mature more quickly than kids do now?
In some respects, I think so.
In some ways, one of the big differences, the major difference, and I think that this was wrong to start with, is that kids today cannot work until they're 18, I think it is. 16. When I was growing up, kids were out in the bean fields at 6 years old. I was.
Do you like the technology with everything in society now?
I think it's amazing what is happening. I think some of it is
superfluous.
Yeah, it's not. I have to admit, it kind of bugs me a little bit to see people come out of the school talking on their cell phones.
Everybody. To
their friends that are standing right next to them, and they're talking to them on their cell phone. And the cell phones, I think, are good, but I think they're misused.
How do you want people to remember you?
As a friend, as someone that cares for others.